Hello, doctors and students. Welcome back to the UCM Podcast. I am Dr. Bill Davis, founder and CEO of UCM Practice Growth Systems. Excited to be back with you again. I have an awesome guest today, good friend of mine, Dr. James Pietrek from Minnesota. Dr. Pietrek, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me, Dr. Davis.
Yeah, so Jim and I have been friends now for it's got to be over 15 years. Got to be probably close to 18 years, something like that. We've known each other a long time, way back when I first started in practice in the San Diego area. Jim was practicing in that area as well. We used to hang out regularly, practice together, train together, just learn so much together as young chiropractors working together in the San Diego area. So just really appreciate you, Jim. I'm excited to have you on the podcast. Finally, it's been way too long. I'm glad that you're on now. And for anybody out there though that doesn't know you, Jim, will you go ahead and introduce yourself to the audience?
Sure. Thank you. I am from Minnesota, and I had found that I had scoliosis in 7th or 8th grade. Didn't think too much of it at the time. And by the time freshman football came around, I felt like I had this stabbing pain between my shoulder blades. And it was, in fact, my rapidly progressing scoliosis. It got to 46 degrees at one point. Now it's about 20% better over the past 24 years since I've been getting checked and adjusted regularly. My balance is about every 3 weeks. I decided I want to be a chiropractor shortly after high school. Got help from a traditional chiropractor, helped the pain go away between my shoulders to a degree. And so I want to make a career out of chiropractic. My brother had also broken his neck at the time. He had to get stabilized in a halo, and that was very scary. And I think early on, I had an appreciation for the neck because of that. When I started in chiropractic school, which I was in California for a while, and then I came back to Minnesota. I've been to California and back a couple of times, so that might be a little confusing. I'll try to make a summary of that during my bio here. But so I came back here for chiropractic college, and it wasn't until I actually broke my wrist that I couldn't do high velocity Gonstead type adjustments anymore, because that's the procedure that I was involved in at the time. And it was really cool, a lot of instrumentation and very analytical, and I liked it about that. But one thing that I never agreed with from the Gonstead chapters is it said that 80% of the time with C1 misalignments, we find that they are adaptations instead of true subluxations. And that never sat right with me, partly because of one of Gonstead's right-hand men, and he kind of has a quirky personality, but so he wasn't really part of the Gonstead seminars, but he was Dr. John Thatcher, and he was just a genius. Thursday nights, we'd hang out at his clinic and just talk shop a lot of times until midnight. And that really was just everything chiropractic to me. But as I mentioned, I broke my wrist, and so I couldn't do that anymore. And so my scoliosis was getting worse, and I was just wondering, what the heck was I going to do? I need to do something that was maybe low force, easy on my wrist. And I came across this research. This was Erickson's books before he condensed it into the nice maroon and beige, whatever color they are now, hardcover. That collection of books, I came across a study that said about half the time when rabbits have medullary damage, when the scientists would go up there and do something to the upper brainstem, these critters half the time would develop scoliosis. And I thought, that's really interesting. That suggests a sort of a functional structural cause instead of a structure function, which is what the classical Gonstead or most other chiropractic techniques would say. And so that really planted a seed, I think, that first, brought me to seeing the world in an above, down, inside out kind of understanding. And then everybody had their green book moment late on a summer night. You can't put that green book down, and above, down, inside out, and that's cool and everything. But then I think we get into practice, and we think, well, it's too deep, it's too wide, it's too broad, it's too confusing to really try to convey to anybody. Let's maybe dangle our toe into the waters once in a while and talk about innate or inborn intelligence, but try not to be too weird about it or whatever. But yeah, it's those questions that kind of guided me up to this evolution. And so I was in California to practice for about 18 years. And actually, Bill, the first time I met you is I knew that you had moved to the area and you wanted to meet up sometime. But I was really busy because I just relocated to Rancho Bernardo from the Miramar, San Diego area. And you had heard that I was having a patient appreciation bonanza. And so you came in and you didn't ask for anything. You just rolled up your sleeves and you got to work. And I think you're doing the myovision scan and it was great. So thank you for that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that was fun. And I mean, so over the years, obviously, Jim, you practiced in California. Now you're practicing back in your home state of Minnesota. And one of the things that has always been important to you, like as you mentioned, is trying to communicate the above, down, inside out philosophy or understanding to patients in a way that would make sense to them, and also in a way that would be consistent with how you see it. And so I'd love for you to start to talk through that with the audience, because it is, essential really to what we do, what you do as upper cervical chiropractors, right? It's such a foundational thing that you do every day. And some doctors, like you said, they may not talk about it at all, and others may talk about it maybe too much, but somewhere in between is probably where you should be, right? So what's, how are you discussing with patients? What is it that you really been going into when it comes to patient education?
Sure. So the definition of health, well, I think it's when you combine Dorland's and Webster's, you're going to get physical, mental, social, and spiritual, actually. And so to me, to be most consistent and to be science, art, philosophy, really an inside out with as little friction friction points as possible, it just makes sense to honor that. Chiropractic was founded on quantum physics. Quantum physics really wasn't discovered quite yet, or they didn't know a way to explain it. But if DD didn't have an understanding of tone and harmonics and resonance and frequency and vibration and such, he wouldn't have made the definitions that he did early on. And, BJ talked about how God is innate or innate is God. And that, to be honest, that kind of weirded me out a little bit. It's like, gosh, BJ, a genius, but he said these things and kind of, where am I going to stand on this? How can I be consistent? And a topic that I just find myself YouTubing anyways is the topic of intelligent design. And let me just define sort of what that is, because there might be some confusion on this. It's not, it used to be maybe creationism. In other words, things are the way they are because that's the way God would have them. Well, you're immediately dismissing yourself from a scientific argument at that point. I believe that there is a God, and that God said that 2 + 2 = 4 before a calculator or a professor could say so. So these principles that sustain and that create are there. And if we take the worldview that there are design patterns all around us, then just like they do in aeronautics, they look at a bird to figure out how to make the plane fly better. We can see patterns, and I've seen patterns with this function to structure concept in a chiropractic setting on a daily basis. And let me explain what I mean by that. There's a doctor that you and I know, Jack Manuel, up in LA, and I went to visit he's one of these white-haired grizzled pro friends of ours. And he said one day, he says, check this out. He says, the side of the short leg, have him do the straight leg raise. keep the knee locked and just see how high they can lift either leg. And what you're going to find is that if there is a restriction, about 80% of the time, it's going to be on the side of the short leg. And I found that to be true. And what he said also is that if the leg comes down, then at least 80% of the time, if there was a restriction on that short leg side, it's going to level off. And you look at that and you say, that is very interesting. What is it? It's not what it is, it's what it implies, right? Because, if it was just about fixing the leg length, you could have stuck a cork in their shoe. You could have manipulated their hip maybe.
Right.
But there was this project back in 1998, Pollard and Ward, and there's 500 people that were involved. And to me, it's one of the best research studies in all of chiropractic. Is they took 500 people with a restricted straight leg raise, supine straight leg raise, and they divvied them up. Some of them got lower back manipulation. Some of them had upper. It wasn't chiropractic. It was a very specific type of massage to the C1 area, which is even more interesting, actually, that you could have such an indirect shot yet have such a profound result. And I think that has everything to do with proprioception. But so what it said is that, there's the control group and the people that only had the upper neck stuff, the people that only had the SI lumbar roll type thing. And the only group that showed significant improvement across the board was the people that only had the upper neck work done. And to me, that was like, how does that happen? What is that? What is that phenomenon? And in December of 2019, I came across this video by one of my favorite scientists on this intelligent design topic. It was Dr. Stephen Meyer. And he was talking about how cell biologists are calling on software engineers to describe the phenomenon that they observe in this kind of something from nothing thing that happens with DNA transcription, the complexity of that. And so they're talking about embedded gene networks and specified complexity and all these big words. But the thing that struck me was something called functional integration. And that's something that people probably haven't heard of. But functional integration means that, let's just say you have a computer and there's hardware and software parts. Functional integration means that a region of, let's just say, the hardware is not defined by its geographical parts, but it's actually defined by the associated functions that seemingly turn on or get activated or stimulated when one portion of that circuit is turned on. And so to me, it's not just touching up here what that may do by way of the vestibular spinal tract, okay, because the only thing that I could reverse engineer and make sense of this functional integration concept is, what if we look at all of our testimonials, what do people tend to talk about? They talk about their sleep is better, their energy is better, their posture, their mobility, their ability to handle stress, their ability to think clearly. So these are big, life meaning sorts of things that say, life is really about the expression of love. And that's what chiropractic is. If you can show love better, if you can bend down, if you have energy and you don't have to be on sleeping pills, right? If the more free of interference in all three layers when it comes to physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual. I've had bad spiritual in my advice in the past. I won't say what it is, but just everybody out there know that God has he is merciful and he is filled with grace. But, I was off in the head on that in my earlier years, and I was a nervous wreck, and I even had physical symptoms, right? So the subluxation principle applies in all three of those layers. The functional integration one does as well, because when you go one ring layer higher on above, down, inside out, which I would call the mental, emotional, social layer, the fancy word for connection, which everybody wants to have, right, in life, is integration. And integration in the dictionary, most people, after I say this, they're going to realize that the standard is like way up here. I know I felt very inadequate when I encountered it, and it was so profound to me that I took it, I framed it, I put it's on this page one of one of these journals I had. Check it out. Integration means the coordination of various mental processes into a normal, effective personality or with the environment. What percentage of your life are you like really integrated? Are you really connected? Are you really purposefully, connecting your ability to reason, your intuition, your perception, your willpower, your imagination, and your memory? I think of the piano man, sing us a song, you're the piano man. We like you most when you are into your element. And if we can set a chiropractic atmosphere and a love among our practice members, patients, particularly for the two chiropractic principles of cause and effect, and the meaning of life, which is the expression of intelligence through matter, right? So when we understand, when people and this isn't things that people are going to search for organically. You got to kind of pull people along. You got to find out what motivates them. And that's the thing, is that we probably all show our practice members or patients a chart that says, look at the road to recovery. We want you to trend upward and to the right with your spinal health. But before that, there was a trend downward and to the right, and there
Right.
were aspirations and inclinations that declined along that way. So chiropractic is one of the most resourceful things that we can do for our health. We don't add anything to anybody. We don't take anything out. And, just making the most, gleaning, not dwelling, but gleaning, and being a journaler is one of the best ways that you can stay connected in sort of those other couple of planes. When I was preparing for this talk, for this interview, Bill, I noticed that a couple of the bullets said your journey in practice and what you recommend to younger doctors in their journey. And I guess the biggest thing is to have a journal and to use it in such a way. I mean, it's so hard to organize information, right? Should it go on the sticky note? Should you file it away? Things that capture you, that you feel like, wow, aha, that don't necessarily have anything to do with, making more money right away or a business idea that you can implement right away. You got to learn how to, really connect those dots. And that's what it's all about with ADIO, as I like to say, is connect your dots for a better constellation. Steve Jobs said, you don't connect your dots by looking forward, you connect them by looking backward. And then you got to trust, in something. He says trust in karma. He was a Buddhist. Smart guy, but I don't happen to ascribe to his religious or whatever, spiritual tones. The other thing that's pulling me on the other end of this is, you know me as Jim, Bill, but I put my name here as James because I've undergone a bit of a metamorphosis. And that is that as I discovered this functional integration thing and something called the Mandelbrot set, the Mandelbrot equation, which to me is like the new E equals MC squared. If you find any video on it, the Mandelbrot set, Mandelbrot, the thing that made me click on his video and learn about this in the first place, which gives me a linear way to present the nonlinear topic of ADIO in the form of a tic-tac-toe board, is he said this. He said, bottomless wonders spring from simple rules repeated without end. And when you see this mathematical equation continually plotted and it goes on for infinity, just like the number pi, it's just a very, very beautiful shape, and it goes on forever. And that's what I would say functional integration is, and what connection is. But the thing that I was going to say is the first, and Bill, I know I've been talking for a while, so just give me the hand signal. All right.
Yeah. Let me jump in for a sec. So I'd like to go back a bit and, unpack a few of these things. One you mentioned the first, the straight leg raise.
Yeah.
And talking about how that was a key piece of kind of understanding how it all works together and how function determines structure. And so, I wanted to, I know you got a great video and a bunch of examples of you working with patients on that straight leg raise, right? And I just want to, I'm going to put a link to that video in the show notes for this episode. So any doctors that want to see that in action, like see how that actually works and what it looks like, I'm going to, encourage you guys to do that. Go watch that short video that Dr. James Pietrek has created, because I think it's really helpful to understand this. But I want to go into, how are you communicating this to patients, right? Because obviously a lot of what we just talked about here is pretty high level stuff. It's you can get lost in it, right? I mean, some of the people that are listening to this are maybe a little lost right now. So getting back to the point of, okay, how can you communicate this to patients, and what are the steps you take in communicating it? What, are you communicating this on a, in bite-sized chunks during an office visit? Is this something that you're doing in a patient orientation class? How are you doing this, and what sort of steps are you taking?
Sure. Even though I've been putting this together for a while, it didn't come connected until August, where my family was out of town for several weeks. So I can't really speak from a ton of experience yet. However, the tic-tac-toe board is something that everybody understands, and it kind of keeps them engaged, because they can take sides, they can take O's or X's, and they can see how these different things connect. And the whole idea is to help them to get more out of their care, more out of their chiropractic care, because again, their spine is trending upward and to the right. Why not trend upward and to the right in other areas for that synergetic impact?
Right.
And you can keep them accountable anyways, because you're going to see them several times, likely over the next several months. And we have Instagram, we have Facebook out there. I'm not a big Facebook or Instagrammer, so this is a good excuse to get that information out in that way. But certainly sending it via email after the recording is made, where I just talk about one part of that tic-tac-toe board. The far left, and this comes from that Mandelbrot set, is an unchanging part, or the fixed part of, let's just say, the experiment. And then the other one is alternating, right? So I teach patients that the subluxation is an electrical problem. It's sort of an on or off switch. If you can understand how a light switch can flip on 1, 2, 3, 4, or a stadium full of lights, or depending on, it all depends on how the electrician set it up in the first place. So then the question becomes, how can we do that in our own lives? How can we remove interference in the spine? But like Dr. Brooks taught us, the late, great Dr. Brooks, in the Taking Care of People seminar, he says, everyone should have a maybe a larger discussion on life, and a way to very compassionately communicate some of the chiropractic principles. His talk, I believe, was issues in the tissues.
Right.
But for me, this helps people to see on a bigger level about how, where could they apply this subluxation concept, this sort of power on, power off, in real time. So the opposite of integration would be disintegration.
Right.
Another reason I feel compelled to tell this story, and why I told in this flyer that I have this week that I'm dishing to people, I call it an anecdote. I know it's not very original, anecdote, but I try to hand this out to people every week. It's just a little handout along with an email. But it just reminds us that, hey, the opposite of integration is disintegration. Oh, I remember what I was going to say. One of the personal stories that I share with people with discernment is a story about my godfather. I'd always wanted to be like him up until about age 20. Nobody's more athletic, funnier, cooler, the whole bit. And he said to me shortly after I called him from the hospital back in 2018, and Bill, you might remember our daughter being born with special needs. That was a big shock. We had no idea. I called him and he said, Jim, if God saw fit, to bring a child like this to you and Kim, then he must think that you're pretty special parents.
Hmm.
And that gave me the hope that I needed at the time.
Hmm.
But you know what? By the end of that month, he went missing. He was in the Tulsa, Oklahoma news, and it ended in a very bad way.
Hmm.
And so he gave me, as it were, the last bit of hope that he had. His widow had told me at the funeral that that he was proud that I had called, but sadly he already felt his life was swirling the toilet.
Hmm.
So you look at that, and everybody's on that line somewhere, and we want to be filled with hope and know that other people need hope, even if they're charismatic on the outside, like my godfather was, because he did have the alcohol problem. And so that was really sad. But it points to some bigger things because, he, and a lot of it is just telling stories like this. In the middle of it, there is an emotional response I'm trying to get out of people if they choose to do this tic-tac-toe track. Is you might have seen the video of the Olympic runner Derek Redmond. He snaps his hamstring and his dad helps him across the finish line.
Right.
Just like when you're engaged like that, you can now sort of do time travel and give different meaning to things that have happened in the past. You can't change past stuff, but you can give it new meaning. And again, it's that responsibility. If we're to trend upward and to the right, then our best, most resourceful thing that we can do is be a good journaler and just follow a couple of 3-step method, a capture. You capture the journal worthy moments and you scan it once in a while, just like SEO, by asking a certain question. And then you connect your dots and you just see if it fits with that Mandelbrot set. You have the one fixed and you have the variable, and see if there's a combination, see if there's impact, see if you're moved. You'll know if you are. Just like with the straight leg raise, the practice member and the doctor knows right away because it's an electrical thing. You're either disintegrated or you're integrated. You're either disconnected or you're connected. The most efficient way of doing that, you could learn how to play an instrument, but is learning how to journal, because again, it covers all of those faculties that I feel are required, to fulfill what integration actually means.
Yeah, and I think this is obviously it's a big topic, and it's something that is really, it's important to, number one, understand yourself, right? Like if you don't have this clearly within you and understand how the physical and the mental, emotional, social, and spiritual, all of that works together. Like if you're not focusing on that and like integrating that within your own life, there's no way you can teach this to patients, right?
Yeah. So
like you said, getting that dialed in through your own journaling, through your own understanding, through conversations with others, and really getting it clear in your own mind, so then you can begin to talk about it with patients is crucial, right?
Yep. Absolutely.
Yeah, and then obviously with patients, they're coming in with a physical problem, right? That's why they're coming there. And then you're going to start to show them how the physical is connected to all these other areas of their life, which inherently they know. Like you said, when you talk about stories, when you talk about specific experiences, like even the classic thing in a consultation, right, is you want to look for the need behind the need. Right.
Yeah.
And what are you doing there? You're trying to find out, how is this physical problem affecting their life? Right. Because that's what it's about. They're there because it's affecting their life. It's affecting the quality of their life, the activities of daily living, like these things that are impacting the social, mental, emotional, and spiritual. Right. That's why they're actually there. And it's the physical that obviously they're manifesting with in the practice, but it's all that other stuff that really matters to them the most.
Yep,
And
absolutely.
So helping them to connect those dots is like what you're saying, that with the tic-tac-toe analogy, with them starting to see like how this all works together, is what you're attempting to do with them in conversation on an ongoing basis.
Exactly. And so one thing I think of, first of all, Dr. Rick Means, when he was talking about how there's certain people that, you move along and then you can have maybe a more specific ask when it comes to a referral. There's more generalized and there's more specific. And so everybody's kind of moving down the football field a little bit in that regard. And another thing, Justin Brown was talking about, I think, the Miracle Morning one day. And so I looked that book up. And it's a really cool acronym. It's SAVERS, which is silence, affirmation, visualization, exercise, reading, and scribing or writing. And that is a very real, thing that they can implement, where one builds up to the next, and your mind is fully sort of turned on, and you're ready to have a good day, whether it's taking care of patients or if you're a chiropractic patient yourself. One little thing I want to add about when I was talking about my godfather there is my first patient I ever had back in February 7th, 2005. He was a Marine, and he came in and I didn't even touch his lower back. I touched only his neck, and then he got deployed. And then he came back a year and a half later. He said, if it wasn't for your adjustments, I wouldn't have been able to deploy. Here's a flag I flew for you, and here's a copy of a poem that I wrote. And in that poem, he talks about, why am I here? I'm seeing Marines get sniped, blown up, and burned alive. Am I here to save and oppress people from a depressed country? No, I'm here for my family, for my God, and for my friends, and for my country. For that, I would kill, and for that, I would die. And so I was like, wow, this sort of happened to me. How can I mold something that is that big to make people see that, hey, they might not be asked to lay their own lives on the line in service of their country, but they do have marching orders. Health is not just a state to arrive at and you plant your flag. It's the resource that you need to carry out your marching orders with the amount of time that you have left. And one thing I said to my godfather, getting back to that, is when I was 17 years old, in between losing state championship football games in the final seconds and bitter end to the track and field season, my brother had that halo. He had the broken neck. I missed my mom and dad. They lived in San Diego. I was finishing up high school because I thought we could win a state championship. And I was bumming. It was the 4th of July. And my godfather, he says, you're going to get through this. I said, how do you know that? He says, you're Jim Pietrek. And I said, who's Jim Pietrek? And he says, like this, he goes, you love sports. And it was just a bizarre thing for him to say. So I always had this question in the back of my mind, like, who is Jim Pietrek? What, am I a bitter about losing state championship football? I mean, what is that? Because he said that you love sports.
Right. That was your identity.
Yeah, exactly. And I later learned that I don't know, you never know. And there's the unanswered questions when something like that happens to somebody. But I think that he maybe was expected to go higher than he did with his athletic scholarship and thought he might have let some other people down. So the book of James, for me, the first 8 verses, what does it hit on? I think they're the wisest words written in history. And that's why I changed my name back to James. Or, that's what it says on my birth certificate. But it talks about the importance of seeking the Creator before social relationships. I'll just say it. He says, James, a bondservant of God and of the Lord Jesus Christ, to the 12 tribes scattered abroad. Greetings. What does that say? That says the priority of seeking the Creator and the Sustainer. I would say that. I wouldn't say God in practice. And I might not even say that in practice to everybody. But it's just logical, right? And it talks about the purpose of trials, that they're for our good, because if we didn't have trials, we would get complacent and we would create drama in our own lives. So it keeps us humble. That's the correct emotion to have joy in trials. Joy is more sustainable and more resourceful than happiness, which is dependent on a dopamine spike. And even the importance of having single-mindedness. If any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask God, who generously gives to all without finding fault. But when he asks, he must believe and not doubt, because the one who doubts is like a wave of the sea, blown and tossed by the wind. He's a double-minded man, and he's not going to receive anything. So it's clear that being connected or having singleness of mind in layer 2 is necessary for even receiving wisdom. You got to have common sense, I think, even before having wisdom. And sometimes we lack that. But when we realize that we can create problems in our own lives, just like the subluxation, Einstein said you can't solve a problem with the same level of thinking that existed when it was created. Sometimes you can't solve a problem with the same layer of being that existed when it was created. People made an intellectual or layer 2 sort of decision, autonomous decision, to come and have us work on their physical shell. Well, if for no other reason than to bring the spiritual into the discussion, is that sometimes that's the most efficient way of dealing with problems in the mental, emotional, and social realm. And that's, it's not intellectual, right? It's intuitive. It's not mystical. It's very mathematically based when you understand the Mandelbrot equation. It's not academic. It's all about application. If there wasn't application in it, it wouldn't, none of this would work. But through the journaling practices and teaching about, some of the other chiropractic principles that just help a person stay accountable, that I can ask them on follow-up visits and put their name on a little index card inside of a tickler box. Hey, how's that, thing that you've been working on? I think practice members will really appreciate that.
Very cool. Well, hey, Dr. James Pietrek, I'm going to call you James from
Right
now
on.
I gotta change my vernacular of how I've been referring to you for 15 years. But James, I appreciate you so much. Appreciate you being on the podcast. Like I said, I know this is a big topic. I wanted to at least introduce it here in this podcast, but I am going to link out to Dr. Pietrek's website, a page on his website, so you can get more of a detailed understanding of this and how he is really thinking about it himself, and then how he's communicating it to patients. It has the video that I mentioned. It has some other things in there with that the tic-tac-toe visual and all that, so that people can, doctors, if you're interested in this, if you're interested in trying to communicate this more effectively to your patients, you can go to that page and get some understanding and some insights. So thank you, Dr. Pietrek, for joining the podcast. Appreciate you. And as we always say, go team upper cervical.
Thanks, Bill.